Hi, thanks so much for joining us. We are bringing you breaking news coverage of the execution of Aaron Gunches. Gunches was convicted of first-degree murder back in 2008 for kidnapping and killing his girlfriend's ex-husband, Ted Price, in 2002. Gunches was put to death by lethal injection less than an hour ago. That execution was scheduled to take place at 10 a.m. Right now, we are waiting for the post-media briefing. This will include members of the media recounting exactly what they saw during the execution, and our Troy Hayden was one of those witnesses. So let's take you out live right now to that post-media briefing happening at the Florence prison. You can see right there our cameras are inside that room. Again, we are waiting for some of the officials. You can see Troy right there to the very far right-hand side. That is where members of the media are sitting. To the left of the podium, it looks like members of possibly Ted Price's family, as well as his attorney. His attorney being, let's see, his attorney may be speaking. We're not sure exactly who is speaking just yet. But what we do know is that, again, members of the media will be recounting exactly what they saw. We also know that John Barcelo, he is the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry Director. He should be present as well. And our Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays. They are expected to speak at this post-media briefing. Now, again, we mentioned earlier, Colleen Claes, that is the family attorney of Ted Price. It looks like she is the brunette that's sitting just left of the podium there. We also may be hearing from Karen Price. That's Ted's sister. Troy had a chance to interview her as well before the execution. Let's give you a little bit of background on executions here in Arizona while we wait for officials to take the podium. Gunches was the first person killed by the state of Arizona since 2022, and now the fourth since 2014. Back in 2022, there were 3 men who were executed, but there was some difficulty administering the lethal injections. In 2014, it took 2 hours for lethal injection drugs to kill Joseph Wood, which then led to an 8-year pause in executions. So last year, there were updated execution protocols established by the Arizona Department of Corrections, and now here we are a year later, and again, less than an hour ago, scheduled at 10 a.m., that is where Aaron Gunches was expected to be executed. He was sentenced to death for the murder of Ted Price, again, 23 years ago, back in 2002. Price was the ex-boyfriend of Gunches' girlfriend. Gunches had kidnapped and shot Price multiple times in the desert off the Beeline Highway. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2008, and he was actually originally scheduled to be executed back in April 2023, but then Governor Hobbs and Attorney General Chris Mays had suspended those executions to review the state's capital punishment system. Let's give you a recap of how this execution was scheduled to go. Gunches was expected to be put to death by lethal injection with a drug known as pentobarbital. That's a barbiturate, which is used as a sedative. This method, this time around, is different from a combination of drugs that was used in prior convictions. Again, this is being at the Florence prison. This prison is no longer used to house inmates, but what it does have is this housing unit 9. That is where the gas chamber and the lethal injection chamber are located. The Department of Corrections switched from, again, this combo of drugs to a single drug protocol after the botched execution of Joseph Wood that happened back in 2014. Wood had apparently gasped for air hundreds of times. Witnesses could include, and again, we're waiting for this post-media briefing to start, but witnesses for the execution included Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays and the Arizona Department of Corrections Director Ryan Thornell. There were also some legal witnesses that we've been told. There were 2 non-legal witnesses. The family of Ted Price was there as well. Again, members of the media and additional witnesses that were chosen by the Arizona Department of Corrections Director Ryan Thornell. And again, we're showing you video of Florence Prison where that execution was scheduled at 10 a.m. Now, usually what happens is after the execution happens, then the media is walked out. They are walked to this room that you see right here where the post-media briefing is being held. And again, to the right, it looks like members of the media. We can just see Troy Hayden right there. And he is expected, hopefully he will be up at the podium. Usually in scenarios like this, some members of the media, they will get up to the podium. Each one will recount exactly what they saw. We know that Troy is among several members. There are other media reporters from the Arizona Republic as well as Telemundo. So it should be interesting to hear what they have to say and exactly what they saw. We know Troy has witnessed several executions in years past. So again, just waiting for him to recount exactly what he saw. And it should also be interesting, too, to note that this has been very, very difficult for the family of Ted Price. We heard from his daughter, Brittany Price. She has said that she has waited 23 long years for this day. She feels like there has been a huge weight that has been lifted. It's allowed her to breathe for the very first time in what feels like a very long time. She said that she can finally begin to move forward with her life. Obviously, when there is an execution, it never really provides complete closure for the family because the family obviously has lost their loved one. But clearly for this family, it has provided some closure, and they've waited a long time to get to this moment. We know that Ted Price, he was a son, he was a brother, he was also a father. He loved sports. He loved motorcycles and muscle cars, and he had a very affectionate personality. Let's talk about, again, Aaron Gunches, who was convicted of his murder. Again, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Ted Price. This happened 23 years ago, back in 2002. He was the ex-boyfriend of Gunches' girlfriend. Gunches had kidnapped and shot Price multiple times in the desert off the Beeline Highway. Again, he was convicted of first-degree murder back in 2008. And it looks like that gentleman right there, he is John Barcelo. He's the Arizona Department of Corrections Rehabilitation and Reentry Director. And let's listen in on what he has to say at this post-media briefing.
Good morning. My name is John Barcelo, Deputy Director of the Arizona Department of Corrections Rehabilitation and Reentry. I will be speaking today on behalf of the department. However, I will not be answering any questions today. After my remarks, you will hear from Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays. She will not be taking any questions in this room. However, you may reach out to her media team with follow-up questions. Following Attorney General Mays, you will hear from the media witnesses who will share their observations and answer questions. The last set of speakers today will be representation from the family of victim Ted Price. I will now provide remarks on behalf of ADCRR. Today, by order of the Arizona Supreme Court, the state of Arizona carried out the death sentence of Aaron Gunches by means of lethal injection at Arizona State Prison Complex, Florence. Mr. Gunches' last meal included a double Western bacon cheeseburger with fries. He also had a spicy gyro and a barbecue gyro, onion rings, and baklava for dessert. Mr. Gunches did not elect to have a spiritual advisor present with him during the process. Mr. Gunches was brought into the execution chamber at 10:01 a.m., and ADCRR staff read the warrant of execution at 10:12 a.m. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Gunches gave his last statement, which I'll read momentarily. The IV process began at 10:04 a.m. and was complete at 10:07 a.m. The drug protocol began at 10:13 a.m. and was completed at 10:19 a.m. ADCRR Director Ryan Thornell has notified the governor and her team that the sentence has been carried out and provided them with the time of death. In coordination with the Office of Inspector General, the medical examiner has taken custody of the body and will be issuing a certificate of death. I personally observed the process of the events today, including the execution. I can say that the process went according to ADCRR policy and procedure. As you'll hear from witnesses today, aside from a cough, Mr. Gunches made no sounds when he was brought into the execution room, and he did not put up any sort of resistance during the process. The medical team was able to go about their work according to procedure. During the administration of the drug protocol, Mr. Gunches took a few heavy breaths and let out a snoring type sound. By all accounts, the process went according to plan without any incident at all. When asked if he would like to provide any last words, Mr. Gunches simply shook his head, no. We will now hear from Arizona Attorney General Mays. As a reminder, she will not be taking any questions today. Attorney General?
Good morning. Today is an incredibly solemn day. An execution is the most serious action that the state takes. And I assure you that it is not taken lightly. But as the chief law enforcement officer in Arizona, it is my job to enforce the law. As Arizona voters have affirmed and the courts have reinforced, the death penalty is the law of the land in Arizona. The family of Ted Price has been waiting for justice for more than 2 decades. They deserve closure. Under a system that is more transparent, more accountable, and more faithful to our Constitution and the rule of law, today, Arizona resumed the death penalty. And justice for Ted Price and his family was finally served. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General. I will now turn it over to the media witnesses who will come up in order as they are seated to my left. They will introduce themselves and their media affiliation and take questions from the podium. Thank you.
My name is Troy Hayden. I'm a television journalist from 12 News. I have been on the Department of Corrections beat for about 20 years. This is my 5th execution, so I've got some experience with this. We're going to hear a lot about Aaron Gunches today, and I think it's important before we move forward to recognize the Price family. As the Attorney General said, I had the opportunity to speak with Karen Price. She told me there's been a hole in her family since 2002 that's not going to be filled today. So as we move forward, that is something we definitely want to keep in mind. It's a strange experience to witness one of these executions. The execution room is very small. We were about 10 by 15, I would think. There are 3 rows of benches. So we walked in at 9:55 is when we got seated. When we first walked in, I saw the Attorney General, and I also saw County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, who were already seated in there. We sat down and looked up. There's a large window, a large rectangular window with curtains. The curtains were closed. Above that window are 3 monitors. The 2 monitors on the side had an overview of the execution table, and the table's long and straight with 2 arms that are kind of like this, that stick out like this. And this is new for me. I'd never seen this. The area all around was blacked out, so you couldn't see the people actually working there. You could just see the table. In the middle were an up-top video of 8 syringes, black and green, just sitting there, and you could see the plungers and you could see the syringes themselves. So that's what we saw. At 10:02, through that monitor, we saw Aaron Gunches get on that table. He was wearing a white jumpsuit and socks. He got on the table with no resistance, laid down. There were 5 people attending him. 1 person kind of had his head, and 1 person for each arm and each leg. they strapped him down with straps. And again, there was no struggle at all. At 10:04, the curtains opened. Once the curtains opened, in previous executions I've seen, the condemned will look out to the witnesses. I never saw him look out. He never looked out once. He continued just to look up ahead. Then they started setting up the IVs. They put heart monitors on him. We could hear a slight beeping. At 10:07, the right arm IV was inserted. I didn't see any sign of pain from him. There wasn't a wincing or anything like that. At 10:09, the left arm IV was put in. Again, no signs of pain. He was blinking, but no expression on his face. Again, looking straight up at the ceiling. More heart monitors were attached at 10:10. The technicians left the room at 10:12. The death warrant was read. And what happens is they walk in and they say, Aaron Gunches, you've been convicted of these crimes. Because of the laws of the state of Arizona, you are now condemned to die. Do you have any last words? And as we heard, he just shook his head. He didn't say anything. Make sure I don't skip anything. At 10:14, I have down here the video that I told you about with the syringes. We saw the black syringe being pushed by a technician. Well, all we could see was the hand in the syringe. And it didn't appear that it affected Gunches at that point. At 10:15, they pushed the green syringe. At 10:15, I noticed a slight wincing. Then, shortly after, there were several deep breaths and kind of a puffing, like a almost a snore. His mouth opened, a couple of twitches. At 10:17, the second green syringe was put in. You can see that. And to me, at 10:18, he stopped breathing. He lost his color. He appeared to be dead to me at 10:18. The time of death was 10:33, but again, to me, at 10:18, he looked like he was gone. So again, some of the issues that I've witnessed in the past, I did not see today. Instead of having the arm IV and a leg IV, it was two arm IVs for the first time, and things appeared to go smoothly.
Jimmy Jenkins, reporter at the Arizona Republic. I previously witnessed the 2022 execution of Frank Atwood. Because of that witnessing experience, I was especially paying attention to the insertion of the IV lines in Mr. Gunches. I agree with all of Troy's timing. At 10 a.m., the mics came on. We could hear the security team bringing Mr. Gunches in. He was wearing a white cotton jumpsuit with socks. He was restrained by restraint team. The restraint team seemed to confer with Mr. Gunches and ask him if he was, comfortable, and he would affirm in the positive. And he was tucked in with a blanket, but his arms were left exposed on each side of the gurney. At 10:04, the curtain opened. I agree, his eyes, I believe, remained looking straight ahead or looking at the people in the room throughout the entire execution, but never out towards the observation area. There was a 4-person that I counted IV team. They attached lines to monitors, and then I wrote down at 10:06, they started feeling around on his right arm, and there was a successful insertion of the IV at 10:06. At 10:07, someone tried the left arm and walked away, and another person stepped in and did a successful IV insertion, I believe at 10:09. So it took a couple minutes to get the left arm in, and I do believe that a person had to be switched out and someone else came in to do that. When the insertion was going on, I did see maybe a slight wince of pain in Mr. Gunches' face. Then lines were taped down, 10:09, 10:11, IV team leaves the room. 10:14, do you have any last words? Shook his head, no. 10:14, we saw the first tube push. Someone came over the PA and said the execution will commence at 10:14. At 10:15, the green tube was pushed using one hand. 10:15, Gunches was still blinking and looking ahead. At 10:16, we saw him exhale, a very large exhale. He was breathing kind of heavily, blowing out, as Troy said. Sounded almost like a snore in some instances. I counted 7 of these large, heavy exhales. At 10:17, there was another large exhale. Also, and then at 10:18, I wrote down no chest movement, eyes closed. At 10:18, it also appeared that the color drained from his face, and his face began to turn gray and white. 10:19, the rest of the injection was administered. We could only hear beeping in the room. Unclear what kind of monitor that was. Heard absolutely no discussion amongst any of the techs or Mr. Gunches. At 10:22, a medical team member came in and checked for a pulse. And then there was a long period where nothing happened, and there was no movement in the room, no activity. And then 10:33, the time of death was called. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What do you mean by curtains?
When you walk in the room, it's 3 tiers of like stadium seating. I counted 18 people in the room. And so we're facing a large glass window, which is covered by a black curtain. And above that are 3 monitors showing 2 overhead views of Mr. Gunches and then 1 overhead view of all the syringes. And so you're first able to see what's going on in the room on those monitors, and then at some point they open the curtains, and then so you're actually looking in from the side. So you're looking in from his right side. So you have multiple vantage points. And then, yeah, I think 10:33 was when they called the time of death and closed the curtains.
You mentioned the left IV was inserted. Just to clarify, was the right IV inserted as well?
Yes, I think that the right IV was inserted first, looked like no problem. But then when they went to insert the left IV, it looked like someone was going through the motions of trying to make that happen, maybe weren't successful, conferred with someone else, stepped away, another person stepped in, took them about a minute or 2, and they were successfully to get that one in. And this would be compared to in the past when they were unsuccessful in those attempts and maybe had to use the femoral vein. There was some talk about maybe that would be done, but looked like they used 1 series of injections and they were prepared for 2 as well. And it looked like those injections went into the right IV.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Holden. I am a reporter with ABC 15 in Phoenix. I have covered this case. I've covered executions in 2 different states, including Oklahoma and here, but I have not witnessed an execution until today. I want to take you through just kind of, we have people here that have seen executions before, but like I said, my first time. So we got into the room, and it was kind of bleacher-style seating with cushioned benches that we sit on, and there are 3 different sections. We saw the Attorney General, we saw the Maricopa County Attorney, and they were sitting kind of in one section away from us. When you walk in, we were led to the third-most section, which is the most inward section, and you could see the 3 monitors like described, and you saw a gray gurney with burgundy straps, restraints that were there, burgundy and cream, I should say. And it was almost as if the area around it was redacted or blacked out. That was what it looked like. So you could see the bed, some floor around it, but that was all you could see. So around 10:02, let me back up. We did hear the microphones come on before Gunches was led into the room. So you could audibly hear that. You knew it was going to start. Gunches was led into the room along with 5 what appeared to be DOC staff members and started being placed on the bed at 10:02. They put restraints on his hands, his ankles, and 1 that wrapped on his waist. They then put a blanket over him that folded at his chest area. There was that experience that we talked about with the curtains, so you could see the monitors first, and then the mic and then the curtains drew, and that's when we saw Gunches let in at 10:02. From there, you saw 4 IV team members who came in, and they were all in white. So they had a white hood on, something white that covered most of their face so you couldn't see them. One was holding a clipboard, the other 3 were helping place the IVs. And the IVs were being placed in both arms, typically what you would see, just how people imagine it, tying off their arm and putting those IVs, taping them on. It didn't seem like there was any kind of conversation with Gunches at any point other than the DOC team checking his restraints. He looked straight ahead, and that was what we observed for, I would say, all of the time we saw him. As the IVs were placed, we heard everyone exited the room. We heard that from what I could see. I think there were people that came in that were in the corner that I could not see from my vantage point or on the screens. The execution warrant was read at 10:13, and they started pushing. You can see them working on that screen with the different syringes, 2 black, 1 at each ends, and 2 green in the middle. So you can see them start pushing at around 10:14. Shortly after that, we saw, I'm going out of order. The execution warrant was read, and they asked him, as you've heard, if he had any last words, and he shook his head. From there, we saw the drugs start to be pushed, and we saw those hard breaths. How Troy described kind of blowing almost is what I equated it to. We also then did hear a snore, a yawn, and he appeared to start losing consciousness. I did see a flinch, a couple small tremors in his arms as well. All of this happening in a matter of minutes, and it appeared that he quickly lost consciousness. I will say, as someone who has not witnessed an execution before, we were left waiting there for a little bit of time. I wouldn't call it abnormal, but all of this happening in a matter of minutes. At some point, someone came in, checked his pulse. We could hear the beeping that Jimmy described, and then that team member walked back out. At 10:33, they read the time of death. Any questions? Right in this elbow crease area where typically you would see the IV. I did see staff members on his left side coming and going, kind of like what Jimmy described. The right one seemed seamless. But like I said, there was no communication, it seemed, between the IV team and Gunches.
Can I address that quickly? I feel like, and I don't want to contradict what you said, but I didn't think that they were making attempts on that left arm. It seemed like the other one, the guy that was there, was kind of setting it up, and the other guy came in and put it right in. It was, so I don't know, maybe we saw something different.
And I'll clarify what I saw. Someone walked up, started placing the IV. Again, there were 3 people working on the IV, and it's not just an insertion. They insert, they have a cover they tape down, and then they have lines that they tape down as well. So they did that on both arms. There appeared to be 2 people that worked on what would be his left arm. Like I said, I couldn't see who walked in the room from my vantage point, but I did not see Director Thornell there during my time.
From start to finish, how long did it actually take to follow up on his reaction and watching his face?
So putting him on the bed, 10:02, time of death, 10:33. But then again, the drugs were starting to be pushed around 10:12 to 10:14. So if you do that math, about 18, 17 minutes right there. His eyes closed. Like I said, he had the hard breaths. So I think we were all watching to see what would happen after that. Like I said, I saw some small tremors in his arms. And then it was a pretty quickly loss of conscious. So then we were watching to see, the time of death and that process. And during that time, you could hear a beeping, like I said, and then a team member come in, check his pulse at one point, walk back out, and then 10:33, the time of death was read. I will say then we were all kind of taken out in groups. So we were with a media group. There were representatives for Gunches that were there as well. Then we had a middle group, who I'm not aware who those people were, and then we had the farmers group, which was representatives from the Price family, the Maricopa County Attorney, and also the State Attorney General.
Real quick, folks, we're just going to adjust audio real quick so that you can hear better. I know it's really hot. We'll hear that I'm Michael Kiefer with Arizona Mirror. This is the 6th execution I've witnessed. I covered another 9 out where you are there. And so I have been, over the last 20 years, chronicling the different problems. And despite the concern about the setting of lines, despite the concern about the provenance and the effectiveness and the age of the drugs, I have to say that this is probably the smoothest execution that I've seen. And I think some of that came from the resoluteness of the person who was being executed. It was strange. This was a very brutal, ugly murder, senseless murder, and at the same time, curiously, it was not a high-profile case. We didn't really hear much about it until the Supreme Court threw out his first conviction, and they sent him back to trial. So, but what's been curious is that the man has been resolute about wanting to die since then, and he had judges even ask during trials if he was committing suicide by jury. And you could sort of see that as he came in. He was resolute. As the other said, he didn't look at anyone. He stared at the ceiling. It was hard to tell whether his eyes were open or closed. And again, when they asked if he had any last words, he just shook his head and closed his eyes, and that was it. There were those brief breathing sounds, the gruffness, the sort of snore. That's because pentobarbital kills by inducing pulmonary edema, which basically your lungs sort of fall apart and you drown on your own body fluids, and so that's what's going on. At the same time, the person is unresponsive, not necessarily insensate. But anyway, it's very quick. It took 17 minutes. In my experience, it's been, except for the 2-hour one that I witnessed in 2014, it usually takes, I would say, 10 to 20 minutes, and this took 17. So it was very uneventful. I have to say, in that way, it's always it's always very surreal. It looks like nothing. And that's a very strange thing, that you find yourself sitting there saying, what just happened here? You've just watched someone die, and it looks like nothing. So, and it feels like eternity. Those 17 minutes, not really that long a time, but it just seems to stretch out forever, especially since there's no motion, there's no nothing. So that's about all I have to say. Yes? That I don't know. I don't know. I don't believe. I think you can get a sedative. It's these are the same drugs that if you have your dog put to sleep or your cat put to sleep, it's the same drugs. I know that when they put animals down, they do give a painkiller beforehand. I don't believe that's in the current protocol. So you're going to have to ask Department of Corrections if he got a sedative.
So you said that 17 is the same one. knows your win to its point?
I counted it. It was like 10:14, 10:15, and then the time of death they called was 10:33. I mean, that's the point where there's no longer a heartbeat. But for the most of that time, you see no movement. As the others said, there's some breaths, some grunts, some hand motion, nothing on his face, no emotion, just taciturn. Yes.
From your experience, is it typical to have someone come and check a pulse and then wait?
Frankly, it was less than I've seen in the past, because in the past I've seen the doctor executioner will come in and then announce on a microphone the prisoner is sedated, or things like that, and that didn't happen until sort of the end. So.
Hello, my name is Jose Galaviz, Gosegalavas, a news reporter for Telemundo, Arizona. I'm going to switch to Spanish just for our newscast, and also I understand that Univision is in presence here. Definitivamente una experiencia única en términos de experimentar la muerte de Aaron Gunches. Es mi primera vez que experimento algo parecido. Nos sentaron en el banquillo para presenciar esta ejecución aproximadamente a las 9:57 de la mañana. Justamente teníamos un vidrio al frente para ver cómo ejecutaban a Aaron, y tenía al frente, también arriba del vidrio, 3 monitores. 2 monitores en cada esquina. Podías ver de una manera el ángulo de cómo lo acostaban en el lugar, pero también podías ver en el monitor principal al frente, justamente enumeraban las inyecciones que le ponían a Aaron. El proceso comenzó muy temprano, a las 10 en punto. Encendieron los micrófonos, se abrieron también las cortinas de la sala de ejecución. Aaron entró a la sala vestido de blanco, y 4 oficiales del Departamento de Correcciones vestidos de negros lo acostaron en la camilla. A las 10 de la mañana, 10:03 de la mañana, pusieron una sábana blanca encima de Aaron. A las 10:04, 4 personas también vestidos de blanco se preparaban para colocarle la inyección. También le colocaron lectores de pulso en su pecho para medir sus signos vitales. Aproximadamente a las 10 de la mañana y 4, la aguja entra en el brazo derecho de Gunches. La segunda aguja tengo anotado que entra a las 10:09 de la mañana en su brazo izquierdo. Los médicos se retiran aproximadamente a las 10:12. Y a las 10:13 tengo anotado que entran y le leen las acusaciones a Aaron. Le preguntaron que si tenía algunas últimas palabras y respondió que no. A las 10:13 comienzan a aplicar las inyecciones. Aaron se mantiene tranquilo. A las 10:14 se le empieza a notar una incomodidad en el rostro, respiración agitada, algunos espasmos en los brazos, también en el torso, hace algunas muecas, unos movimientos en su rostro. Se le nota que tiene complicaciones para respirar. Según mi punto de vista y lo que decía mi reloj, a las 10:17 Aaron dejó de moverse. A las 10:23 alguien entró, revisó el monitor pectoral y rápidamente salió. Y a las 10:33, como ya habían anunciado, la hora de muerte, y cerraron las cortinas. Interesante mencionar que de las 10:14 que Aaron se encontraba recibiendo las inyecciones, y también se encontraba con esas complicaciones para respirar, hasta las 10:33 siempre dejaron las cortinas abiertas para que las personas pudiesen ver todo el proceso. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Se habla de algunos tubos verdes que administraban, también se habla de estas jeringas. ¿Podrías describir la diferencia entre estos tubos y quizás las inyecciones? Y si bien recuerdas cuántas inyecciones quizás utilizaron.
Sí, habían 8 inyecciones en total, 4 inyecciones en el lado izquierdo y 4 inyecciones en el lado derecho. Las inyecciones del lado derecho se aplicaron, las inyecciones del lado izquierdo no se suministraron. Tengo entendido, según lo que vi, habían 2, de cada set, habían 2 inyecciones verdes y 2 inyecciones negras en cada brazo. Quizás los reporteros acá me pueden ayudar con su experiencia. Troy, just to confirm with you, there was 2 green injections and 2 blacks. Do you know the difference between them?
Well, Michael was the one, somebody said something to saline.
Saline, that they would do a saline clear, and then the drug, and then the saline.
But I don't think we got compliment. I mean,
That's my assumption, right?
If you read DOC's protocol, how they have the graph with the lethal injection drugs is labeled the same way. No one ever announced what was going on, during this process, but after reading that protocol, I assumed the 2 black were saline, the 2 green in the middle were the lethal drugs, and that's what I think.
Okay.
Una última pregunta, en su first time, es la primera vez que algo así. How do you feel?
Mencionaban los reporteros que es un poco surreal y la verdad lo es. Siento que estoy procesando lo que acabamos de ver, lo que acabo de ver. No es no es un momento donde te preparas para ver la muerte de alguien y en la manera en que lo hacen. Creo que dentro de todo estoy bien, dentro de todo entiendo la importancia del hecho y la importancia de lo que sucedió y estoy acá para reportarlo.
and looking at my notes, it's after the green syringe was pushed, when we had the deep breathing and the puffing, and so that would make more sense. There was nothing happened after the black syringe was pushed.
Okay.
Once the green was pushed is when we had.
You only did 1 black and 1 green, is that?
I think there was 2.
Clear after, yeah.
Okay.
So you see black, green, black, and they go push in that order, not all at the same time.
But they were all used.
Yeah. Well, they have two different sets, so I don't want to confuse
Yeah,
them.
so I had black pushed,
Yes.
and then green pushed. Black pushed at 10:14, green pushed at 10:15. That's when the wincing started and the deep breaths. 10:17, I had second green syringe. Then at 10:19, I had second black syringe. So all 4 were.
In one arm.
We don't know.
They mentioned that the left arm wasn't really part of
They
it.
both had IVs.
Yeah.
But I don't know what led to what.
Yeah, that's a good.
The syringes.
You can't really tell.
Yeah, you can't really tell.
Looking at a control panel, you have, and when you're sitting and you're looking in the room, the lines go out in the other room. You can't see that. We see what's happening. You see hands and you see the control board, and that was put in actually after the 2014 execution where they used 15 injections.
Something else that he mentioned, just last question, 10:13, the charges are red, but prior to that, the IVs were already in one arm.
They put the IVs in first.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then the charges were red.
Then
And you watch that on a closed circuit camera.
I do believe they have 2 sets of those injections that they can use, and then they do a primary IV catheter and then another one in addition, just in case. So there's a total of 8 that you can see on the screen, yes, but only 4 that were pushed. Do you want me to go up to the mic? Do you want me to? Sorry.
I do not. And we saw them place what would be his right first. What would be his right first. because we were looking at him this way. We saw what would be his right first placed and his left second.
You mentioned few people were working on the IV. Jose Angel mentioned 4 officers were dressed in black. So there was a total of how many or so?
So just to clarify, Gunches was let in, helped on the table by 5 what appeared to be DOC employees. They restrained, checked on him, left the room. Then there were 4 additional people that were part of the IV medical team who came in. They were all dressed in white. Gunches was wearing a white jumpsuit and white socks. It was like a white cream.
Are there any differences in physical appearance versus the mugshot that most people know?
Not that I noted. Obviously, he has very differing mugshots since his arrest was over 2 decades ago, but there were no noticeable differences from the most recent. Anything else?
Thank you for that. Thank you, media witnesses. We will now begin hearing from the family and legal representation of the victim, Mr. Ted Price. As they are comfortable, they are invited to come up in order as they are seated to my right. They will introduce themselves, provide their commentary, and take questions from the podium. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Clace. I'm with Arizona Voice for Crime Victims here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm the attorney for Karen Price, who is the sister of Ted Price. The execution of inmate Aaron Brian Gunches has finally, after more than 22 years, brought justice and finality to the criminal case. Inmate Gunches murdered Ted Price in November of 2002. He was indicted nearly a year later in October of 2003. Gunches pled guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping in late 2007. The penalty phase of Gunches' trial began in early 2008. That was more than 5 years after Ted's murder. The jury returned a death verdict. In 2010, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld Gunches' first-degree murder conviction and his kidnapping conviction and kidnapping sentence. However, the court remanded for a new penalty phase, reasoning that the evidence did not support the cruel, heinous, and depraved aggravator. After Gunches' second penalty phase, another jury again sentenced him to death in August of 2013. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld his sentence in 2016. From that time, Gunches chose to waive his remaining appellate remedies. Litigation related to the warrant of execution ensued in January of 2023, lasting close to 2 years. In February of this year, the Arizona Supreme Court issued a warrant of execution and set today's date in accordance with Arizona law. Arizona's Victims' Bill of Rights provides victims with constitutional rights to justice, to a speedy trial, and to a prompt and final conclusion after the conviction and sentence. Over 22 years is an unconstitutionally long time for a victim family to wait for a sentence to be carried out. Ms. Price and her family were present for Gunches' guilty plea and both of the penalty phases. The Price family never gave up in seeking justice for Ted, and they never gave up in seeking finality for themselves. Ms. Price participated in and asserted her constitutional rights throughout the entire criminal process. Over the last 2 years, she has continuously fought to get to this point today. Ms. Price was present and witnessed inmate Gunches' execution, and she will address you shortly. There was no sign or no expression of remorse from inmate Gunches. Ms. Price is not here today to engage in conversation about past litigation or to debate the legal sentence that Gunches received and was carried out today. She is grateful and relieved that the process has ended. Moving forward, we would ask that you please remember Ted for the person that he was in life rather than for the violent way in which his life was taken. Ted was a son, a brother, an uncle, and a father, and a friend. Ted was kind-hearted, and he liked sports. Ted was, still is, and will always be loved by his family and friends. I would ask that if she would like to do so, that you allow Ms. Price to tell you about her brother, and I would ask that you please remain respectful of her rights and sensitive to her experience here today. Thank you.
Good morning. As Colleen said, my name is Karen Price. On behalf of the Price family, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about Ted. Ted was my older brother by just 15 months, and he and I were raised alongside our 2 younger sisters. The 4 of us were separated by only 6 years, so we shared a very close bond as we grew up. We were raised in Utah by 2 loving parents, and our childhood was in many ways idyllic. If Ted were alive today, he would be 63 years old. I'd like to imagine we would both be enjoying our retirement and perhaps planning a trip together rather than me coming here to witness the execution of the man that took his life. Ted was a very charming person, and he was passionate about many things. He enjoyed watching the Phoenix Suns and the Arizona Diamondbacks. He enjoyed playing his guitar, driving his motorcycle, and muscle cars, and he had a special affection for cats. He never met a cat he didn't like, and they always loved him. Above all, Ted was a kind, compassionate, and loving person who made friends wherever he went. Ted was a father to 2 beautiful children. His daughter Brittany was 16, and his son Justin was 14 when he was killed. They have spent more than half of their adult lives without their father. Ted never got to walk Brittany down the aisle when she married John. He never witnessed Justin join the Marine Corps or celebrated Justin's marriage to his fiancée, Jamie. Nothing will ever bring Ted back, so we've had no choice but to move forward without him. As I prepared these remarks, I searched for synonyms for the word closure. It's a term everyone throws around but doesn't truly capture the reality of our situation. Although we've taken the final step in the legal process, the pain of losing Ted remains profound and cannot be conveyed in mere words. It is a relief that we no longer have to meet with lawyers, sift through court documents, check prison records, or communicate with victims' advocates or reporters. Some of you were very nice. Today marks the final chapter in a process that has spanned nearly 23 years, but our journey of healing is far from over. I genuinely hope that after today, we can finally begin to put this chapter behind us. Now, it's important to our family that everyone understand why Ted was killed. The focus often shifts away from the truth. The media frequently reports that Ted was the ex-husband of the inmate's girlfriend, Catherine Chavez Letcher, and they were never married. They were in a relationship for over 10 years after Ted had divorced his children's mother. When he and Catherine broke up, Ted moved back to Utah to pursue his studies to become a radiology technician. He later found a program in Arizona that would allow him to complete his degree earlier, and so he asked Catherine if he could stay with her temporarily until school housing became available. Ted left Utah on November 17th to return to Arizona to complete his schooling. His body was found in the Arizona desert 23 days later on December 10th, 2002. From police records and court documents, we know that Catherine had begun using methamphetamines in the time that she and Ted were apart. While they were together, she had never been a drug user. So Ted, when he returned, was shocked to discover that her home had turned into a drug house where users gathered and drugs were sold. He witnessed Catherine using meth with her teenage daughter in front of her young son. Ted confronted her and threatened to report her to the authorities. We know Ted and Kat argued. We know that Catherine struck Ted with the telephone. And we know that Catherine made a phone call shortly after that fight. And we know that the inmate later showed up to Catherine's apartment and forced Ted into a car at gunpoint, where he later took him into the desert and shot him. Ted just wanted to protect the two children that he had cared about. Tragically, he had no idea that his threat would lead to the murder at the hands of Catherine Letcher's drug dealer, who wanted him silenced. Ted was killed for doing the right thing. A senseless crime that robbed the world of a genuinely kind man. Catherine has never been held accountable for the role that she played in Ted's murder. Today, our family wants to express our heartfelt gratitude to Detective Kim Seagraves for her tireless work in bringing Ted's killer to justice. She kept the family informed every step of the way and ensured that the evidence was solid enough for a conviction. We cannot thank her enough for the role that she played in this process. We also want to recognize George Gilketsis, former prosecuting attorney for Maricopa County. The inmate pleaded guilty for killing Ted, saving us from a lengthy trial. But George's diligence and professionalism during both the sentencing hearings led to 2 juries convicting him of death sentence. When the execution was deferred 2 years ago, Attorney General Chris Mays reached out to my family and promised that we would be prioritized when executions resumed. She kept her word, and for that we are deeply grateful. And lastly, I want to thank Colleen Clace for her invaluable support as my legal counsel during this challenging time. Her knowledge and insight guided my family and me through the final phase of the court system, and I honestly don't know how we would have made it through the last 2 years without her. That picture of Ted is from February 2002, 9 months before he was murdered. I took it when we dropped him off at the Salt Lake City airport following my grandmother's funeral. It's ironic that he was waving goodbye because that was the last time I saw him alive. It's a memory I will carry with me forever. Thank you for your time. Relief that it was over. Yes. I do.
First of all, I want to commend you for your courage to speak to us today. I know this is not easy, and that this takes a lot of courage to speak. So
thank you.
What have your emotions been like this week after 2 decades?
I don't think we ever thought that this day would come. So it's kind of surreal, and everything in the legal process is a part of the process. So it's one step, and then it's one step, and then it's one step. And I don't think that we really thought it was going to happen until maybe this week. Once we got past the clemency hearing, it felt real, and I've just done my best to prepare myself for this process today, and not associate it so much with Ted, but just the end of the legal process. And thank you. And I said I was going to get through this without crying, so I got close. Yeah.
I would say I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And obviously Ted has a family that loves him, and there's such a big ripple effect when
Right.
this occurs. I'm wondering if you could shed light on just how the rest of his family is doing this week, how you all are kind of getting to this moment here.
So his daughter, Brittany, actually intended to come here today, and at some point decided that she didn't think that this is what Ted would want for her, so she did not come. And I actually was blessed with a granddaughter last week on Thursday, and March 13th, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it because I wanted to be able to be there for my daughter. But she gave me her blessing to come here today. She knows how important it was for me to have a family member be here for Ted. So that's why I'm here today, to represent Ted. Okay? Thanks.
My name is Carrie Howe, and I'm the Administrator of Victim Services here at Department of Corrections. I'll be reading a statement from Brittany Price, the daughter of Ted Price. I've waited for this moment for 23 long years. Today, as I close this wreath for the first time in a long time, I can finally begin to move forward with my life. The pain of reliving the circumstances surrounding my father's death for over 2 decades has taken a significant toll on my family and me. Today marks the end of that painful chapter, and I couldn't be more grateful. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has supported us throughout this journey. Their dedication to seeking justice for my father and our right to finality has been invaluable. Without all the unwavering support, we would not have reached this point. I'm forever grateful for everything that everyone has done for us, especially these last few years as they stood by us and fought for the closure we so desperately needed. My dad wasn't with us for long. The last time I got to spend time with him, I was probably 10 years old when he came to visit my brother and I in Massachusetts. But I'll always cherish the time we did have together when we lived with him in Arizona. I remember when he used to pick me up from school on his motorcycle and all the kids thinking how cool it was. Our talks on the phone after my parents separated, he always updated me on how he was taking care of my cat that I left behind with him, Skittles. He took care of her for me until she passed. I still have every birthday and holiday card he sent me, and the one thing I cherish the most, which is the last letter I received from him exactly 1 year before his life was taken. I love and miss you so much, Daddy. May you finally rest in peace.
As our media briefing comes to an end, please remember the following. First, there will be no media interviews here on the property. You are, however, welcome to film stand-ups in the media staging area off of 79 and Butte Avenue. The staging area will close in 2 hours. If you have any questions for ADCRR, our media team will be more than happy to respond to you. Please reach out to them at media@azadc.gov. Lastly, we'll keep this room open for about 30 minutes or so to allow for wrap-up. Please wait a few moments before doing anything at all so we can allow for the victim's family to...
All right, you have just been listening to very vivid and detailed accounts of the execution of Aaron Gunches, sentenced to death for killing Ted Price back in 2002. That post-media briefing just wrapping up right there. The execution of Gunches was scheduled at about 10 a.m. He was officially declared dead at 10:33 a.m. this morning. In this post-briefing, you heard from 5 members of the media, including our Troy Hayden. You also heard from the family of Ted Price, which included Karen Price, the sister of Ted Price, and the family's attorney, Colleen Clace. Karen Price wanted people to know what a kind and affectionate brother and father of 2 he was. And after today, she feels relief and that the family can finally put this chapter behind them. A statement was also read from his daughter, Brittany, and it said that she waited 23 long years for this day and that she feels like a huge weight has been lifted. Witnesses say that during this execution, there was no resistance from Gunches, no comment from him before his execution, and that the process went without incident accordingly. Of course, we're going to have much more coverage from Troy Hayden, who was there to witness this execution, along with Erica Stapleton, who was at this post briefing. That's coming up on all of our shows starting in just about an hour at 12 News at 1. We want to thank you so much for joining us. We now get you back to regular programming.